Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Pa's Christmas Wish. Chapter 1. Sophie Watson blew her new husband Henry a kiss and waved goodbye to him as he rode out to mend fences. She watched until he and Dusty, the hired hand, were out of sight, then giggled in excitement. It was time to test her plan. With Henry's parents, Charles and Olivia, gone into town for the day, it was the perfect time to see if she had perfected her Christmas present for Henry. She hurried up to her room and changed into a split riding skirt and slipped on a pair of boots. Then she hustled out toward the barn where a dozen or more horses stood in the pasture, nibbling at the grass that peeked above the thin layer of snow on the ground. It seemed like there were more horses than usual, and she didn't see the one Dusty had been teaching her on. Well, there was one who looked a lot like Daisy. They were likely not that much different. Sophie slipped into the barn and gathered up the necessities: saddle, bit, blanket, then headed out into the corral. The white horse was near the fence, so she dropped the saddle on the top row of the fence and moved over to her target. The horse seemed to fight the bit, but she persisted until it was in place, then plopped the blanket on and reached for the saddle. Darn, she was too short to reach the horse's back. She patted the stallion's neck, then led it closer to the fence and climbed up on the next to the top slat. The horse snorted in warning as she heaved the saddle onto its back. It pranced around skittishly as she fastened the cinch beneath its belly. There. She was now ready for her first solo ride. Henry would be so happy to discover she had learned to ride. Speaking of Henry, wasn't that him riding back toward the ranch? He must have forgotten something. Now, she hurried to climb into the saddle before he noticed her. She wanted to be astride when he saw her. She dropped into the saddle and grabbed the reins. The horse shifted as she let her weight settle in, then suddenly the stallion emitted an angry snort and reared in the air, his hooves slashing wildly. She grabbed for his mane, trying desperately to hang on, but it was useless. The last thing she heard as she was thrown off the horse's back was Henry screaming her name. A roar escaped Henry Watson's mouth as he jerked straight up in bed and hollered. Once again, he was too late. He wasn't in time to save sweet Sophie. He could see the vision of her lying on the ground, the horse's hooves smashing into her, and the life seeping out of her. That had been the worst day of his life. He'd been riding out with Dusty when he realized he'd forgotten their lunch and rode back to the ranch to get it. That was when he'd seen Sophie in the corral, climbing onto the back of Moonbeam, the meanest horse they'd rounded up lately. What was she doing? And why? He'd kicked his horse into a gallop and rode straight for the corral, his heart thundering faster and harder than the horse's hooves were pounding the ground. He screamed her name, but it was too late. When she'd flown off the horse's back and beneath its hooves, a part of him had died right along with her. Dearest God, it had been 10 years. 10 years. A person would think he would have stopped dreaming about that fateful day by now, but no. It didn't happen as often anymore, but the nightmares still crept in and caught him unaware some nights. Henry hauled himself out of bed and slid into his pants, then shoved his feet in his boots. He knew it would be a while before he could go back to sleep, so he was just going to go sit on the front porch and breathe some fresh Montana air. He moved quietly past his parents' room and down the stairs, then let himself out the door onto the big wraparound porch. It was after midnight, and the world was silent. But he spotted something that made him nearly jolt backward. Someone was out there sitting in one of the wooden rockers in the corner. He was startled until he realized it was only his father. Apparently, he couldn't sleep either. "Pa," he said. "What are you doing out here?" "Hello, son." Charles Watson coughed and settled down deeper into the rocker. "I couldn't rest, so I decided to get some air. It's mighty nice out here tonight. Almost warm for this time of year." "What are you doing up?" "I couldn't sleep either. Thought I'd come out for a while." "Are you feeling all right?" Charles had been ill lately, something they thought had to do with his heart. He was losing weight at a rapid pace, and both Henry and his mother had been worrying constantly about him. "I feel fair to middlin'," he replied, which was his normal answer whenever he was asked how he was feeling. "Why don't you sit down and join me, boy?" Henry moved to the chair next to his father and took a seat. "Have another bad dream?" Charles asked in a quiet voice. Henry nodded. "Yeah. It's the first one I've had in a couple of months. They don't come as much anymore." Charles rocked silently and nodded. "Good. But, son, it's been 10 years. You need to put it behind you." Anger mixed with pain swelled up in Henry's chest. "Don't you think I know that, Pa? Don't you think I tell myself that every day?" Charles shifted his thin frame as if even sitting were uncomfortable for him. "I know. I know. But I'm not going to live forever, you know. I hate going to my grave knowing you're still hurting, still by yourself." Henry fought the tears that threatened to well up in his eyes. He loved his father and would do anything to ease his mind. He worried about the old man all the time. He'd watched his father go downhill lately and knew Charles was likely nearing the end of his life. The idea of losing his father made him feel physically ill. "If there is one thing I want for Christmas this year, it's to see you married." Charles's words seemed to stab a knife into Henry's heart. Why in tarnation would he declare such a thing? "Look, son, I know you may never find someone you love like you did your sweet Sophie, but there are other benefits to marriage. Like companionship, like not being all alone out here in the hills, like having a partner for life. Even without deep love, marriage can be a good thing." Charles started coughing, unable to catch his breath. He doubled over and Henry quickly stood and moved to his side, his hands falling on his father's shaking shoulders. Finally, Charles stopped coughing and managed to speak again. "I don't want you to be alone forever, son. I want you to get married. Do it by Christmas, won't you? That's the only thing I long for." He gasped in a breath. "It's the only thing I want. And I never ask you for nothing. By Christmas? Just 3 months away." Henry's heart sank. He didn't want to marry anyone if he couldn't be married to Sophie. And by Christmas? Who in tarnation could he possibly choose? There were a few single women around, but none who really appealed to him. He couldn't think of a single lady he could imagine partnering with for the rest of his life. Yet, he wanted to make his father happy. It was true his father never asked him for anything. And to be honest, Henry hadn't always been the easiest son. There had been times when he'd been downright callous and rude to his pa. And Charles might not be around much longer. Henry felt guilt surge through him. Couldn't he make his dying father happy? Could he do it? Could he put his pain aside and try to fulfill his father's wishes? Could he get married? He knew his father only wanted the best for him. He knew his father worried about him. But still. Could he do it? Henry sucked in a long, troubled breath. Maybe he could. Maybe he should trust his father. Maybe it would work out the best for both of them. He gazed down at his father's balding head in the faint moonlight. He looked so vulnerable right then. As if a stiff breeze could blow him away. Henry cringed. What a thought. He was surely exaggerating things. Yet, he could give his father his dearest wish. He had the power to do it. There was nothing but past pain to stop him. And Henry did want to take the worry and stress off his father's shoulders. He sighed heavily. It looked like he needed to get married. Chapter 2. Disaster had struck again. Kitty Clarke didn't know whether to cry or wail. She, along with dozens of her fellow workers, had lost their jobs at a Boston factory. Darn, darn, darn. Now what? She had a 12-year-old daughter to support and no means to do it with. Her husband had died 2 years ago just before Christmas. Last year she had still been mourning his loss, and now this. Would her daughter ever have another Merry Christmas? Nausea rose up in Kitty's stomach, and she felt like she could faint. She didn't know if she could manage any of this. She had felt broken when Tim died, as if she couldn't go on, but she didn't have a choice. She had to do it for Faith, her daughter. She'd fallen in love with Tim when she was just 16 years old. He was so sweet and supportive. He stuck by her through the death of her parents, through a serious illness of her own, and they had suffered through the loss of their home from a disastrous fire. They never had much money, but they did have each other. And then Tim had fallen ill. He had always been so strong, so confident, but his illness took all that away from him. He struggled to beat the disease, but in the end, he lost the battle. He died just a few days before Christmas. Christmas now was a time of bitterness for Kitty. She wondered if Faith would ever have a Christmas like other children enjoyed. And now, there would be even less money to make the holiday special. "Kitty, what about you?" Margie White asked her. She gave a start. "Sorry, Margie, I was lost in thought and didn't hear what was going on." "What about me?" "A few of the women, including me, have decided to become mail-order brides. Are you interested?" "I don't even know what a mail-order bride is," she confessed. "An agency matches you up with a man from out west and you exchange letters, and then if that works out, you get married. You go out there and live. You're set for life and you get a fresh start. That's what I want." "You mean you marry some man you've never met?" Kitty stared at her friend. "Exactly. There aren't many women out west, you know, and a lot of men are willing to pay expenses for one to come out there to marry them." Margie clasped her thin fingers together, a look of excitement lighting her brown eyes and putting a flush on her pale cheeks. "I'm doing it. There's nothing for me here in Boston. Nothing for her in Boston." That was exactly how it was for Kitty. No family left, except her daughter, and now no job. No future. "It seems worth thinking about, anyway." Kitty shook her head. "I must be nuts for even thinking about it. Marry a stranger? We're all meeting tomorrow morning to go put in our applications. If you decide, be at the market next door at 9 in the morning, Marge told her. "It's too exciting, isn't it? I can't wait." Kitty couldn't get the idea out of her mind. It was crazy, it was insane, but it was a safety rope she could grab. She had no other immediate solution to her situation. She no longer had a job. What was she supposed to do? She didn't really have time to mull over her options. She was still thinking about becoming a mail-order bride as she made supper for her and Faith. She thought about it as she swept the floors and did the dishes. But what if the man she was matched with was crazy? What if he were a mean, brutal type of person who didn't care if she and Faith were fed and clothed? What if he beat them? What if he were dirt poor and didn't have any money? They might be even worse off than they were now. But what if he was a nice man who would take good care of them? She looked over at Faith as her daughter worked at letting down the hem in one of her dresses. Faith was growing quickly. She was already nearly as tall as Kitty. Everyone commented on how much they looked alike. Her daughter's hair was glossy brunette, like her own, her eyes big and chocolatey brown. She looked at least 4 years older than her 12 years. But she was still a little girl in Kitty's eyes. Kitty blinked back tears as she eyed her daughter. She'd had a tough childhood so far, what with losing her father and her grandparents all in the last few years. They'd had very little money and there wasn't room in the budget for any extras. Didn't Faith deserve a chance at happiness, a chance of a life with a bright future? There was little hope for that if they stayed here in Boston. At least, they would have a chance if they tried something new. Maybe if Kitty took this chance, things could actually work out for the better. Here in Boston, she was definitely stuck with nothing to look forward to but another factory job, if she were lucky, another tiny apartment, and more years of pinching and scraping along. Maybe in the West, she could actually have a home of her own, a yard, and a man who would partner with her to make a bright future. When she went to bed that night, she couldn't sleep. Thoughts were racing through her mind. Should she or shouldn't she? It wasn't just her future she was risking, but Faith's as well, and that was the most important thing. She wanted what was best for her daughter. Would that be to stay here in the familiar even if it meant being poor and finding another job she hated, or to take a chance on the unknown where they might find opportunities that weren't available here? During the night, the pros and cons chased through Kitty's mind as she tossed and turned in her bed. As much as she hated to think about the things that could go wrong, she found herself leaning toward taking a chance. There was no real future for her here, but out west, the possibilities could be endless. Couldn't they? Wasn't that why so many people were pulling up stakes and taking a gamble on just such a move? Of course, most of them weren't adding in the element of marrying a complete stranger to their plans. Partnering up with someone when you had no idea what type of person they were, what they looked like, or what their morals were. Was it worth the risk? If a man cared enough to invest in virtually buying a wife, would he really mistreat her? After all, she would basically be an investment. He wouldn't invest in something and then abuse it, would he? It wouldn't make sense, would it? By the time the sun came over the horizon, Kitty was more confused than ever but had come to a partial decision. She would at least go and explore the possibility. It couldn't hurt to at least look at this option, could it? After all, she wasn't committing to anything. She would just learn a little more about it, that was all. Chapter 3. Henry knelt at Sophie's gravesite, his head bowed. He came here often to communicate with her, usually just about little things, everyday things, but today he needed to talk to her about something special. "Sophie, honey, you know my dad is sick. I think he's dying. He's asked me to do something for him, and I don't want to do it because I still love you. He wants me to get married. By Christmas." He swallowed, unable to go on. He really didn't want to go through with this, but he'd promised. His father's happiness was more important than his own pain and grief right now. He himself might never be truly happy with another woman, but his father wanted it. Henry could make the old man's dream come true. He could fulfill his father's dying wish. "I'll never love another woman, Sophie. I can't. So this is going to be a marriage of convenience." That's probably all this mail-order woman wants, anyway. After all, who would come all the way out west to find love? He'd made up his mind after his talk with his father that he could offer a woman security, a roof over her head, plenty to eat, clothes on her back. That would have to be enough. The one thing it was impossible for him to give her was his heart. "I hope you understand, Sophie. I hope you know that I will always love you, but I need to do this for Pa. Forgive me." Henry placed the bouquet of flowers he held on her grave and patted the headstone. He was glad there was no one else at the gravesite to witness him talking to her grave. People would have no doubt he had lost his mind. It had been 10 years since she died. He knew that was way too long, but he didn't seem to be able to help it. Talking to Sophie made him feel better, though, less alone. Now, he had to go. He was headed to the mail-order bride agency to place his order. That sounded funny, didn't it? He was ordering a woman to be his wife, like he'd order fence wire or a new buggy. Henry got on his horse and rode the rest of the way to the tiny office located next to the mercantile. He hesitated before he walked through the door, but finally, he squared his shoulders and entered the little building. A small, gray-haired woman with spectacles perched on her nose looked up from the desk and greeted him. "Hello. Are you here to apply for a bride?" The question suddenly seemed so absurd that he couldn't speak. He merely nodded. "Well, we'll get you taken care of right away. By the way, my name is Elsie Borden." "And yours?" He cleared his throat. "Henry Watson." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Watson. You're making an excellent decision today. Man wasn't meant to live alone, you know. Marriage is the answer to loneliness." Henry simply nodded again and reached for the application she handed him. He read it over, filled out the pertinent information, and shoved it back across the desk. Pulling out his wallet, he reached in and took out the required fee and handed it to her. "Why, thank you, Mr. Watson. We should have someone here for you before Christmas at the latest." She looked over the form, then pursed her lips. "Now I see here there are a few blanks you didn't fill out. Is there anything special you're seeking in a wife?" "I just want a wife. That's it. Let me know when you find one." He spoke abruptly, then turned and hurried out of the building. He didn't want to talk about it. He just wanted it done. Henry rode back to the ranch in a black mood. He didn't want a wife, he didn't want to get married. He just wanted to be left alone. Olivia saw him ride in and stepped out on the porch to greet him. "So, Henry, did you get all your chores done in town? I hope you remembered to pick up that pound of sugar for me." "Yeah, Ma, I remembered." "Where's Pa?" "I've got something to tell you both." "I'm right here, son." "What is it you want to say?" Charles opened the door and stepped out on the porch next to his wife. Henry looked at them both. They'd had a long marriage, and a good one. He was sure that he and Sophie would have had the same. He sighed heavily and tried to put on a pleasant expression for his father. I went to the mail-order bride agency while I was in town. The lady said she thinks she can have someone here for me before Christmas. I'll get married shortly after her arrival." "Oh, Henry. I'm so happy for you." His mother clapped a hand to her chest, her eyes wide in surprise. "I didn't even know you were thinking about such a step." Henry looked at his father. "I'm doing it for you, Pa. You want me married by Christmas. I didn't know any other way to do it." Tears welled up in his father's eyes. He visibly swallowed, and then a slow smile broke out on his face. "I'm mighty pleased, son. Mighty pleased. I'm praying it will all work out for the best, boy. In fact, I know it will." Henry wondered whether his father was right. It was true that he was doing this for Charles, but there was some part of Henry, albeit a small part, who hoped his father was right. Hoped that maybe, just maybe, this could be a good thing for everyone involved. Kitty stood at the back of the women lined up at the desk in the mail-order bride agency office. She still didn't know if she was doing the right thing, but she had decided this was a better chance for a brighter future than searching for another job in a factory. She glanced again at handbills on the wall that depicted photographs of breathtaking landscapes. At least out west, there would be fresh air to breathe. There were still a couple of women in front of her in line, and Kitty listened carefully as they were interviewed. They were each asked if they had been married before, and if they had any bonds holding them there in Boston. "The men out west really prefer women who are single and don't have encumbrances," she heard the clerk say over and over again. She hadn't even thought about that. Were widows automatically disqualified? Were mothers not eligible to be a mail-order brides? If that were the case, what was she to do? Well, there was no choice. She was just going to have to fib. She would tell them she'd never been married and claim Faith as her little sister. That would surely make her application more appealing. Guilt immediately surged through her and she began to perspire. Lying wasn't normal for her, in fact, she rarely if ever lied. But a sudden urge to see this through had gripped her, and she didn't want to lose her chance. When it was her turn, she told the story she'd just made up and sighed with relief when they told her a teenage girl shouldn't be a problem. They were crying out for females out west, and if she were willing to pay the girl's passage herself, things should work out just fine. Paying for Faith's passage would take the rest of the money Kitty had, but it was the only thing she knew to do. Now, she just had to convince Faith to pretend to be her sister, not her daughter. That wasn't going to be easy, either, because Kitty had raised Faith to be honest. Lying wouldn't come easy to the girl, but there was no other choice now. Kitty would just have to make her understand the importance of it. When she reached home, she'd talk to Faith and make her understand. This lie was necessary for their future. She didn't want Faith to grow up where there was no hope for a better life than what they had now. If they didn't do this, Kitty was afraid things would only get worse. Chapter 4. Things moved faster than Kitty had imagined they would. It was only a few weeks later when she got a message that a husband had been found for her. This puzzled her because she was under the impression that the two of them would correspond for a spell. But no, she must have been mistaken. She and Faith were to leave for Montana in just a few days. The man was a rancher who had no specific requirements for his bride, so bringing her sister along should not be a problem. As it turned out, Faith seemed more excited about the upcoming journey than Kitty was. She eagerly packed her few belongings, and later that week, she skipped along beside her mother as they headed to the train station. I can't believe it, Mama. We're actually going to Montana. Do you think we'll see any Indians while we're there? Kitty gave her a stern look. I don't know, Faith, but we're not going out there to see Indians. We're going out there to start a new life. You do understand this, don't you? Kitty's nerves were on edge. Faith might be all excited, but she was now feeling dread, wondering if she was doing the right thing. And you have to quit calling me Mama and remember to call me Kitty. As far as everyone else is concerned, I'm your sister, remember, not your mother. Faith looked contrite. I'm sorry, Kitty. I forgot. I won't do it again. Ah, honey, I know you won't. I hate it, but it has to be this way. At least, until I'm married. Maybe then, we can tell Mr. Watson the truth. Faith chewed her lower lip for a moment. Do you think you'll like him? Do you think he'll be a nice man? Will he like me? I sure hope so, honey. We just have to have faith. I know he will be a good man. He's got to be. God wouldn't send us to a bad man. Her forehead crinkled. Would he? Kitty sighed. No, honey. God wouldn't send us to a bad man. She prayed she was telling the truth this time. Henry drove the wagon slowly toward the train station. He was on his way to pick up his mail-order bride, and he wished the journey would never end. This was a black day in his life as far as he was concerned. He didn't want to meet this woman, didn't want her in his life. But he had promised his father. At that moment, he wished he wasn't the type of man who kept his promises, but unfortunately, he was. He had no idea how this was going to turn out. He was a fool for allowing himself to get into this mess. Marrying a complete stranger? He was an idiot. This woman could turn out to be a hateful harlot or worse yet, a thief or murderer, someone hiding out from the law. Of course, he knew a few other men who had chosen to marry mail-order brides, and it seemed like those marriages were working out well enough, but with his luck, he could get some crazy person. Then what would he do? Shoot myself, he muttered, answering his own question. Well, it was too late to back out now. Henry got out of the wagon at the train station and tied his horse to a hitching rail. He paced back and forth on the rickety boardwalk as he waited on the train to pull in, the tension in his gut building. His hands were balled into fists and he had to consciously unfold them. He didn't want to look like he was ready to beat somebody up when he met the lady. When the train finally steamed into the station, Henry watched it slowly grind to a stop. A minute later, the conductor climbed down and placed the steps for the passengers to use as they disembarked. Henry watched as the people climbed down, his curiosity rising despite himself. First came a couple of lads, a bedraggled mother at their sides, then a grandmotherly lady who was greeted by a swarm of people as she laughed and cried. Next came a well-dressed couple followed by a middle-aged man. A few other passengers followed them off the train. Then, two young women climbed down. They seemed to be together and looked tired and frazzled. He couldn't deny they were attractive with shiny sable hair and big brown eyes. They were both tall and the young one was quite slender, the older one with a lush, curvy figure. No one else got off the train, so Henry turned his gaze back to the two women who were now looking around them as if searching for someone. Could one of them possibly be his bride? Well, only one way to find out. Henry strode to the two females, his hat in his hand. Pardon me, ladies, but would one of you be Kitty Clarke? The older woman, who looked to be about 30, turned to look at him, her chocolate brown eyes wide and startled. I'm Kitty Clarke, she said. I'm Henry Watson, ma'am. How do you do, Mr. Watson? It's nice to meet you at last. This is my, sister, Faith Clarke. Confusion clouded Henry's eyes. Sister? This was the first he'd heard of a sister. He looked at the younger woman who looked much like Kitty but appeared to only be in her teens. They both had a look of fear on their faces and were pale and almost shaking. He didn't know Kitty would be bringing a sister with her. Dang. What was he supposed to do with her? He had no idea, but from the looks of them, they weren't up to being questioned about it. My wagon's parked over here. We'll get your baggage loaded and head out for my ranch." Neither woman spoke as they made their way to the wagon, each of them carrying a carpetbag. Henry hoisted the trunk they'd pointed out to him onto his shoulder. He stowed the baggage in the back of the wagon, then helped them both up to the seat. "It's just a few miles to the ranch. We should be there pretty quick. From the look on your face, I'm guessing you weren't informed that my sister would be coming with me," Kitty said as they rolled out of town. "No, ma'am, I didn't know anything about her. But she's your sister, so she's welcome." "Thank you, Henry. I didn't mean to spring her on you." "Well, it's definitely a surprise." Uncomfortable, Henry changed the subject. "How was your trip?" Kitty sighed with fatigue. "It was long, Mr. Watson. Very long." He nodded, then searched for something else to say. "Have you ever been out west before?" "No, we haven't. It certainly is a beautiful land." Kitty let her gaze roam across the countryside, taking in the hills and woods brushed with autumn colors. "I'm not used to such wide-open spaces." "Well, we've got plenty of them here in Montana. You can travel for miles and not see a building or another human soul. I hope you'll get used to the solitude we enjoy here." Kitty nodded, then fell silent. Her sister hadn't uttered a word. Mostly, all of them kept quiet until he neared the ranch. Kitty had to fight to control her nerves. Henry Watson was a good-looking man. He was well-built and had a head of silky brown hair and golden eyes. But he was still a stranger. "Just over the next hill is where our land starts. It's a big ranch, so it's still a ways to the house. When we get there, you'll meet my ma and pa. They're eager to meet you." "Your parents are still living, then?" We lost both our parents a few years ago." "Sorry to hear that. I hope mine will be around for a long time yet. My pa's been ill for a while now, though. He's mighty happy I've decided to marry." "I see. What about your mother? Is she happy, too?" "She is. I think she'll be thrilled to have another woman on the place. Well, 2 women now." He said the words but didn't know if he believed them. They hadn't planned on 2 women coming to stay with them. Knowing his mother, though, she'd take it in stride. "So this land all belongs to your family?" "Yep. What you see and plenty more. The house is just over the next hill and across the river." Henry didn't say any more as they made their way over the bridge and pulled up in front of the house. "Here we are. Welcome home, ladies." Chapter 5. Kitty stared at the house before her. It was built of logs, but they were plain to be mostly flat. In truth, it was much finer than a regular log cabin. 2 stories tall with a massive stone chimney on each end, it almost appeared like a mansion to her. A wide porch wrapped around the house and rocking chairs stood waiting to be enjoyed. There was a large barn to the north of the house and mountains were visible behind that building. She almost felt as if they had entered a foreign country, it was so different from Boston. The front door opened, and an older couple appeared on the porch. The woman was small, and a huge smile wreathed her face. A thin, frail-looking man stood beside her. Kitty couldn't help but notice they both looked surprised to see 2 women in the wagon. The woman recovered from her shock first and hurried toward the wagon. "Welcome, welcome. Get down and come into the house, won't you? You must be exhausted from your journey." Henry helped Faith down, then Kitty. "Now, which one of you is Kitty?" "It must be you." "I'm Olivia." She took Kitty's hands in her own and greeted her warmly. "And who do we have here?" "This is Faith, my little sister." "I'm sorry, I understand you weren't informed she would be with me." "That's not a problem at all. You're both welcome." Faith blushed at being talked about but didn't say anything. "I'm Charles, Henry's father." "Welcome, welcome. We sure are glad you're here." The man didn't hesitate to shake their hands with surprising vigor. "Come on in. Let me show you to your room, ladies," Olivia said. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." Olivia led them through a large living room and up the staircase. Kitty thought her mouth was probably hanging open as she took in the beauty of the house. When Olivia opened the door to a room and said it was where Kitty would stay, she couldn't help but gasp. It was lovely. There were French doors that opened to a balcony, and Kitty could see an amazing view. In the distance, mountains framed the valley, and a nearby pond glistening in the sunlight. Hills of green rolled away and majestic trees fanned the sapphire blue sky. Having been born and raised in Boston, she had never seen a sight like it before. A large four-poster bed stood against a wall, and a stone fireplace was framed by twin wardrobes on each side. She was awed by the welcoming air of the room. It's lovely. Kitty couldn't believe this was her room. She'd never lived in such a fine place. I will put Faith in the room next door, Olivia said, and led the way to the next room. A brass bed stood in its center, a bright, cheery quilt covering it. A rocking chair stood in front of a window that overlooked the same scene as the one Kitty could see from her room. "Oh, it's so pretty," Faith said. Her face told Kitty that Faith was a very happy girl to be housed in such a lovely room. Emotions twisted within her. Pain that she had never been able to provide Faith with the nicer things in life on her own, and hope that maybe she had made the right decision. She was truly relieved that her daughter had been willing to go along with her plan. She was a good girl, one who deserved to feel safe and cared for. "You ladies feel free to settle in. You're welcome to come downstairs and join me, or you can stay up here and rest. Whatever suits you." "Thank you. I think we'll rest a bit," Kitty told the older woman. "We'll be down in just a little while." Olivia left the room and Kitty moved to her daughter's side and wrapped her arms around her. "You are so brave, honey. You're doing really well pretending to be my sister." "It's beautiful here, Mama. I like it, but I don't like people thinking you're my sister. You are my mother. What if I forget?" She buried her head in Kitty's shoulder and sniffed back tears. "I know, honey, I know. Hopefully, it won't be long before we can tell these people the truth. For now, though, we've got to keep up the act. It's the only way." But Kitty wondered. It seemed to her that it would have been all right to claim Faith as her daughter. But now that she lied, she felt compelled to keep it up. If she confessed her deceit so soon, wouldn't she and Faith be rejected? Who in the world would want to marry a woman who had started lying from the first moment? Kitty and Faith went downstairs a little later and found Olivia in the kitchen. "How can we help?" Kitty asked the woman. "It's almost supper time. Could you set the table for me?" "Of course. Faith, you do that, and I can mash the potatoes, all right?" The women worked together and a few minutes later the family sat down at the table. There was an abundance of food. Roast beef, mashed potatoes and gravy, corn, biscuits and pickles were all passed around. Kitty watched Faith eat more than she had in ages. Her daughter's eyes lit with delight when the apple pie was served. "So are you two going to get married right away?" Olivia asked. Before Kitty could say a word, Henry answered his mother. "No. I think we should wait a while, get to know each other a bit better." Kitty couldn't help the swell of relief that ran through her. She knew she had come here to marry the man, but she wasn't in any hurry to accomplish the task. He was a stranger, after all, and good-looking as he was, she couldn't imagine sharing a bed with him. She didn't even know him. "I agree," she said softly. "Getting to know each other better sounds like a good idea." "Okay, but let's not put it off too long, folks. I'd like to meet my grandchildren before I die," Charles chimed in. "None of us are getting any younger." Kitty felt heat rise in her cheeks. She hadn't even thought about having more children. Plus, hadn't Henry said that he thought his father might be dying? If so, she hardly thought she could give him a grandchild that quickly. "That would be nice," Olivia said slowly. "I will want some time to plan a proper wedding. Now, who wants another piece of pie? How about you, Faith?" "Please, ma'am." Kitty had to smile. One thing was for sure, they were definitely going to eat better here. She couldn't remember the last time they'd had a meal this tasty. Faith was so thin Kitty was afraid a strong wind would blow her away. Maybe she would start putting on a little weight now. Kitty and Faith helped with the dishes, then joined the men in the living room, bringing coffee with them. A large dog lay at Charles's feet, and his tail wagged to welcome the women into the room. "This is Brutus," Charles introduced the big dog. "He's part of the family." "Hello, Brutus," Faith said, delighted to meet the animal. "What a beautiful dog. He'll be your friend for life." Conversation flowed, but it wasn't long before Faith couldn't hide her yawns and Kitty felt exhaustion creeping in as well. When it became obvious Faith wasn't going to be able to stay awake much longer, Kitty decided it was time to say goodnight. As they headed up the stairs, Brutus got up and followed at Faith's heels. The look of surprise on her face made them all laugh. "Looks like he's picked you as his new best friend, Faith." Charles chuckled. "Apparently, he's going to sleep in your room tonight." Faith grinned broadly and patted the big dog's head. "And he's more than welcome." Chapter 6. Kitty opened the canned green beans and dropped them into the pan on the cook stove. She'd been on the ranch for 2 weeks now and had taken on the role as chef, especially catering to Charles's needs. Her father had also had heart issues, and she'd made a concerted effort to learn to cook foods he both loved and were good for him. Now she was trying out those skills on Charles, and he seemed to feel better for her care. She had a roast chicken in the oven to go with the beans and sliced apples and cheese for dessert. The rest of the family had gone to church, but Kitty had begged off, claiming a headache. She hadn't stepped foot in a church since Tim died. She knew she would be expected to join the others in worship eventually, but she wasn't ready yet. Today she was happy to avoid the issue and stay home and cook dinner for everyone. She was trying to adjust to her new life, but it was starkly different. She wasn't used to not seeing throngs of people everywhere she looked. Here in Montana, she saw trees and horses instead. Their nearest neighbors were a mile away. She heard the rattle of the wagon on the drive, and in a minute, the front door slammed open and they came trooping inside. They all had rosy cheeks from the chilly wind blowing outside, and Faith raced into the kitchen and announced it was snowing. "That's perfect weather for getting a Christmas tree, isn't it?" Kitty thought her daughter looked happy. Apparently, she was adjusting better to their new environment than Kitty was. "I'm glad you like the snow, Faith, because you're going to see plenty of it the next few months." Olivia chuckled as she donned an apron to help with dinner. "We have some mighty fierce winters here. I love the snow. It's so white and beautiful, and the world seems so still and clean when it's buried under all the white." "I agree, child, I agree," Olivia said. "Wait until you see this state wearing its ermine coat. I don't know if there's a prettier sight anywhere. Now, it looks like Kitty just about has our meal ready. Why don't you set the table?" "Kitty, is your headache better?" "Much better, thank you. We missed having you with us at church. Everyone in town is eager to meet you." "I'm sorry. Maybe next week." "Well, some of the women folk can't wait. There's a bunch of them coming here for lunch on Saturday. They're all excited to welcome another female to the community." Kitty was surprised to hear it. She was eager to meet them, too, but nervous as well. That was more people she would have to lie to about her past. She smiled and nodded, but said little. She hated living a lie, and each day she regretted more and more that she hadn't been honest from the first moment. Faith seemed to be adjusting to their new life well, even pretending she was her mother's sister, but Kitty was having a little more trouble. It seemed to her that it was being disloyal to Tim to deny his existence. Henry came in from the barn, and they sat down to Sunday dinner. Kitty had to admit it made her happy to see everyone enjoying the meal she had cooked. By the time dessert was finished, Charles was groaning and patting his belly. "I'll say this for you, Kitty. You are one mighty fine cook. I'm glad you liked it, Charles. I hope it helps you keep your strength up." He sighed contentedly. "How could it not?" "Okay, let's get the dishes done so we can go get the tree," Faith bubbled. Kitty had to chuckle. She'd never seen Kitty so excited to wash dishes. When the kitchen was returned to its spotless state, Olivia fussed about them. Now, you girls, make sure you dress good and warm. It's cold out there and the snow is coming down in buckets. She turned to her son. You sure it's a good time to be out in the weather? That's why we're taking the sled to get the tree, Henry announced. I'll go hitch it up. He put on his coat and left the house. All right, let's get bundled up, Kitty said to Faith. She looked at Olivia. Will you come with us? Heavens, no, Olivia said with a smile. Much too cold out there for my liking. Faith ran up and gave Olivia a quick hug before dashing off for her coat and mittens. Kitty was stunned to see her daughter's display of affection toward Olivia, but it pleased her, and clearly had pleased Olivia as well. The older woman had turned back to the kitchen, but not before Kitty saw tears in her eyes. A few minutes later, they piled into the sled and Olivia came out to tuck a blanket snugly around them, then they were off. Kitty looked around in amazement. It was an incredibly beautiful sight. The world was bathed in white, a couple inches of snow covering the ground already. It was quiet except for the gay jingling of the bells on the horses that pulled the sleigh. Kitty breathed in the fresh, sweet, frigid air. Where are we going to get the tree? Faith asked. I've got one picked out I think will be perfect, Henry informed them. It's just over the next hill. Right over there. They had crested the hill and Henry pointed at a tree. Oh, it's beautiful, Faith exclaimed, and Kitty had to agree with her. The tree was about 7 feet tall and had a perfect, symmetrical shape. Kitty almost felt sad that it was going to be cut down. This area could use a little thinning to give the cattle more room to roam, Henry said, almost as if he could read her mind. They piled out of the sleigh, and Henry grabbed the axe. They made their way to the tree and Kitty stopped and admired the view. Henry was right. The area was thick with trees. Taking one down would only improve the beauty. Kitty was amazed at how quickly Henry worked the axe. She found herself appreciating his swift, graceful movements, and imagining the way his muscles would bunch beneath the sleeves of his woolen coat. It wasn't long before he looked around to make sure they were safely out of the way and then hollered, "Timber." The tree crashed to the ground, and she and Faith both clapped in admiration. "Give me just a minute, and I'll be ready to load her up," he said, pausing to catch his breath. He turned and gazed out over the land while he rested. Kitty didn't know what overcame her, but she gave in to an irresistible urge. Bending over, she scooped up a mitten full of snow and packed it into a ball, then turned and fired it at his back. It smacked right between his shoulders. "Hey," he hollered in surprise. "A sneak attack? Why, I'm shocked." She squealed as he armed himself with a snowball and hurled it at her. Then Faith threw one back at him, and he chased her and threw one at her. Soon snowballs were flying and they were all laughing like crazy children. Kitty hid behind a tree as Henry aimed at Faith, who then charged out and fired a snowball at Henry. He ran toward Kitty now, and she turned to dash away but her feet slid on the snow and she went tumbling backward right into Henry. They both tumbled to the ground, Kitty landing right on Henry's lap. Kitty was stunned to find herself resting against his strong body. Her head fell back against his firm chest, her dark hair tumbling loose from its bun. She felt the brawn of his muscles beneath his unbuttoned coat. She remained motionless for a moment before Faith's giggle and the sea of sensations washing over her slapped her back into reality. She scrambled to regain her footing and managed to stand up. She clapped her hands against her flaming hot cheeks as he lay there laughing at her. As he slowly stood, she sputtered an apology. I am sorry. I didn't mean to crash into you. Don't worry about it, Kitty. I kind of liked it." She couldn't believe he said that. He liked it? Well, if she were honest, she sort of liked the feel of him next to her as well. But she didn't want to like it. She didn't want to like being that close to him. It felt like a betrayal to Tim. Well, playtime's over. Let's get that tree back to the house, she said more firmly than necessary. I'm getting cold. The truth was, though, she didn't feel cold at all. In fact, she was quite warm. Chapter 7. Kitty was slightly wary of this time of year. Tim had loved Christmas and always made a big deal out of it. Back then, Kitty had joined in with her whole heart. But sometimes just the scent of the tree made Kitty feel the ache of her loss. She pretended otherwise, though, as she did every year. For Faith's sake. There was no reason to make the holiday any harder for her daughter. In truth, she was glad that Faith could still be happy at Christmas, and Kitty did her best to join Faith in that happiness, sometimes more successfully than other times. When they got home, they set the tree on the porch to let the snow melt off it. The snow had quit falling, but they didn't want the layer of white that still covered the tree to drip onto the wood floors. Once the snow had melted off, though, they moved the tree into the main room of the house. They wouldn't decorate it for a few days yet, even though it was now set up. Kitty could smell its potent fragrance every time she walked past the tree. Friday night, Kitty slept little. She'd been dreaming about Tim again. She saw his sweet face in her dreams, felt his loving touch. Then she saw him twist in pain and agony and illness, and she was helpless to do anything about it. He begged her for help, and she just stood there doing nothing. It was awful. On top of that, the town ladies were coming for lunch that next day. That meant more people she had to lie to about Faith being her sister. She knew her daughter wouldn't give the secret away, but she felt wrong about asking her to cover for her. Faith was such a good girl, and Kitty knew it was hard for her to deceive other people. Maybe a cup of warm milk would help her sleep. She slipped out of bed and started down the stairs but stopped when she heard voices coming from below. It was Henry and Olivia. "Henry, you need to let go of the past and you know it. You've got a bride that came all the way from Boston just to marry you, and you can't keep putting it off. I don't think you've even spent a minute alone with Kitty since she's been here." "I know, Ma, I know, but I'm just not ready." Henry sounded sad and discouraged to Kitty, and she wondered why he had even sent for a bride if he didn't want one. "I understand, son, but it isn't right to have two single women living here without setting a wedding date. Kitty's a good girl. She helps around the house and has taken a real shine to your father. I think he's been feeling much better since she's been taking care of him, don't you?" "He does seem to be improving," Henry agreed. "Well, why don't you do some improving yourself and set a wedding date? It's not fair to keep her waiting, you know. If you brought her all the way out here from Boston and now don't marry her, you should be ashamed. I mean it, son. Set the date. Don't let the past destroy the future." Kitty had heard enough. She turned and slipped back up the staircase, confusion rippling through her. What was in Henry's past that was making him so hesitant? Were they both hiding secrets from each other? Kitty dressed in a pretty green dress and made sure Faith was wearing her good blue dress. The women would be here any minute, and she wanted to make sure they both looked their best. "Okay, honey, remember, I'm your sister, not your mother." Faith rolled her eyes. "I know, Mama. I haven't given away our secret yet, have I?" Kitty hugged her daughter close. "No, you haven't, and I know you won't. I'm just nervous about meeting the other ladies, I guess. They're going to like you, Mama. I mean, Kitty." Faith grinned and hugged her back. "Olivia said they're real nice. And Olivia should know." Kitty laughed and headed down the stairs, her daughter close by her side. A couple of minutes later, Kitty heard wagons rolling into the yard. She stopped arranging the cookies they were going to serve and peeked out the window. She saw 4 buggies roll up and women erupt out of them. She counted 7 of them, all shapes, sizes, and ages. A couple of them toted babies with them, and there were at least 3 toddlers. Olivia opened the doors and a flurry of activity filled the entryway. Everyone was talking at once, hugging and kissing her and Faith, welcoming them into their midst. Kitty was overwhelmed. A huge smile wreathed her face as everyone introduced themselves and their little ones and moved on into the parlor. They all gathered and indulged in coffee, cookies, and hot chocolate. Kitty looked around the room and tried to remember everyone's name. The short round redhead with twin 3-year-olds was Katie Miller, the tall woman who wore her hair in a long, gray braid was Marlene Gibbs, and the 2 blondes were the Hartman sisters. Harriet Beaumont was married to the town banker, and she really couldn't remember the name of the young woman with her. Jane, maybe? She did know she was Mrs. Beaumont's daughter. The one who stood out most to her, though, was a woman about her own age. Lucinda Woodard was tall and had chestnut-colored hair. She wore a brown skirt and an ivory shirtwaist, and Kitty thought she was an attractive, strong-looking woman. She was pleased when she looked up from making more hot chocolate and found Lucinda behind her in the kitchen. "I thought you might need some help," Lucinda said, and started refilling a couple of near-empty cookie platters. "The cookies are a big hit." "Thank you. I'm so glad you came with the others, Lucinda. I wouldn't have missed it. I'm a mail-order bride, too, you see. I was eager to meet someone else who decided to take the risk. It's a scary decision, isn't it?" I was petrified. Kitty turned to face Lucinda, pausing before continuing. "I guess you could say I still am. We're not married yet, you know." She grabbed a potholder and moved the milk off the burner, her cheeks reddening. "You will be in no time, I reckon. It's nice, really, that you have some time to get to know Henry better. Ben and I were married the day I got here." A wave of gratitude swept through Kitty. Thank goodness Henry hadn't wanted to rush right into anything. She wondered if Lucinda's husband had wanted his marital rights the very night of the wedding, but she couldn't find the words to ask. "So, how are things working out between you?" she said instead. She was almost afraid to hear the answer. "Do you think you made the right decision, leaving everything familiar behind and marrying a stranger in a strange land?" There was a long pause before Lucinda answered. "I think it's beautiful here. I came from New York City. It was so crowded there. I was a maid, you see, and I was tired of keeping house for somebody else. I decided I might as well be doing it for myself. I've been here 3 years now, and I am happy. Ben is a good man. Yes, I made the right decision." Lucinda's voice was serious as she answered Kitty's question. "I'm glad," Kitty said. She only hoped she could say the same thing 3 years hence. Chapter 8. Henry paused on the back porch as he heard feminine voices coming from the kitchen. He recognized Kitty's voice, then heard her say the name Lucinda. Ah, Lucinda Woodard. She was married to Ben Woodard, and he knew she had been a mail-order bride, too. He heard Lucinda ask Kitty if she'd been scared, and he waited without breathing to hear her answer. When she said, petrified, his heart sank. Her voice sounded weak and shaky. Darn. He hadn't really thought about her at all. The thought struck him dumb. He quickly backed out the door, needing time before he saw Kitty. He breathed in deeply of the fresh air and kicked at a clod of dirt. He really was a hard, bitter man. Kitty had been petrified, yet she'd risked it all and come out here for a fresh start, a new chance at life. He didn't know why, he didn't know what she'd been through. He hadn't bothered to learn anything about her. He'd been so wrapped up in his own pain, he'd forgotten she might have issues of her own. His ma was right. He should be ashamed of dragging her out here, then pushing her away. She had given up her life to become his wife, and that was what should happen. That was what she deserved. But he still didn't want to love her. He didn't think he could. He still loved Sophie too much. He didn't believe he would ever have that kind of relationship again in this lifetime. He had to make Kitty understand that this would be a marriage of convenience only, more like a business transaction. She would become his helpmate, his partner. She would keep his house and tend his gardens, and in return, he would take care of her and her sister. That was fair, wasn't it? Now, he just had to find a time and place to convince her that theirs would be a marriage in name only. Once again, Kitty had trouble sleeping. She tossed and turned, falling into snatches of fitful sleep filled with haunting dreams of Tim, and of Henry discovering the truth about her. She was really a widow, not a spinster, and Faith was not a sibling but her own daughter. In her dreams, she cried as Henry ordered her and Faith off the ranch in the middle of a blizzard. He didn't even offer to drive them to town, and they were fighting and pawing their way through knee-deep snowdrifts as stinging sleet pounded against them. Just as Faith stumbled and keeled over face down, Kitty awoke once again, her blankets twisted around her, her heart thundering. Okay, that was it. She wasn't going to sleep anymore that night. Her internal clock alerted her that it was close to dawn, anyway. She was getting up. She lit the lamp and got dressed in a brown dress and brushed her hair into a bun at the nape of her neck, her mind still fighting to shut out the vision her dreams had created. Downstairs, she moved about to get the coffee going and poured herself a cup as soon as it was done. She worked quietly, not wanting to disturb Charles and Olivia in their room just next door. Maybe, she'd take her coffee and go out on the chilly porch and watch the sun come up. She wrapped herself in a soft, woolly shawl, grabbed the coffee mug and headed for the rocking chairs on the front porch. Much to her surprise, she found she wasn't the first one there. "Good morning, Kitty." She startled, then relaxed when she recognized Henry's voice. "Won't you join me?" Kitty wanted to turn and run but made herself walk forward and take a chair. "Good morning. I didn't know anyone else was up." "I didn't sleep well last night," he admitted. "I had something on my mind." Kitty was surprised. He actually seemed to want to talk about it. He was usually so quiet. "Don't you want to know what it was keeping me awake?" he asked, and she saw him tilt his head as he looked at her. "It was you." His words felt like a punch, and she sucked in her breath. "Me? Why me? I realize that I've not been fair to you. I've been dragging my feet about setting a wedding date, and you came out here to be married. I am going to marry you, Kitty, but we need to talk first. Have I done something wrong?" Confusion tinged her voice, and she set her coffee mug down on the table so she could pull her shawl closer about her. "Oh, no, Kitty, no," Henry hurried to say. "You and Faith have both been a big help to Ma. My pa seems like he's feeling better every day now that you're here, too. No, you've done nothing wrong, but I have to warn you. I don't want a real marriage. I mean, legal and everything, but without the romantic part. A marriage of convenience, I guess you'd call it." The first rays of the rising sun traced a bit of light into the room, and she bit her lip. She didn't know what to think. A tiny wounded part of her wondered if he didn't find her attractive or if she repulsed him. A much larger part wanted to cry with relief. Now, if she understood him right, she wouldn't have to give herself to another man besides her sweet Tim. Especially not this big, brooding man that frightened her a little bit. "So let me be clear. You're saying we'll be married but we won't make love?" She felt heat rise in her cheeks as she said the words, but she needed to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding him. "Yes," he almost whispered his answer, then his voice grew stronger. "Yes, I think that would be best. We'll have to sleep in the same room, of course, so the others won't realize ours is not a regular marriage. I'm sorry if you wanted more, but I don't have it in me right now to give to you. If you don't agree, I'll pay the expenses for you and Faith to return to Boston. It's your choice, Kitty." There it was, a way to escape if she wanted it. But did she? Did she really want to take Faith back to Boston? She thought about how happy her daughter seemed here. Faith and Olivia were like grandmother and granddaughter. Faith loved playing chess with Charles, and Brutus slept in her room every night. Her cheeks were rosy, and she was starting to fill out her tall, slender frame. She couldn't remember when she'd seen her daughter so happy. No, it was best for Faith to stay here with the Watsons. She would have to marry Henry. "I accept your proposal of marriage." She stuck out her hand and they shook, their hands melding together. It seemed like they stayed that way for a long time. Chapter 9. Sunday morning, Kitty knew she couldn't avoid going to church again this week, so she reluctantly got dressed and rode into town with the rest of the family. She hadn't stepped foot into a church since Tim had died. She was angry at God, even doubted his existence sometimes. Why did he take a good man like Tim and leave other, evil men to thrive? She'd prayed for him to save Tim's life, and he hadn't. Yes, she was angry. But time had passed, and she knew she had to learn to accept it. To everything there is a season, she thought as the buggy pulled up at the church, and Tim's season was over. She let Henry help her from the carriage and drew in a deep breath before turning to greet the folks lingering in front of the little white church. Lucinda and Ben Woodard were the first to greet them, and Kitty felt like she was running into an old friend. The tall woman did look happy. Maybe there was still hope for Henry and her. She stood next to Henry during the service, and they shared a hymnal, their fingers occasionally brushing against each other. She was relieved when the song was finished, and they could sit down. The minister moved to the pulpit and smiled warmly at the congregation and began the sermon. Reverend Mason was a good speaker, but Kitty let her mind drift as the sermon progressed. It actually felt good to be in church again. She enjoyed the music and the feeling of serenity that reigned here, calming her tense nerves and her soul. Then something the minister said caught her attention. "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech but with actions and in truth," it says in 1 John 3 verse 18. That means that we must be honest, not only with what we say to others but with our treatment of others as well. We cannot say one thing and do another, then expect to be trusted. Reverend Mason ran his clear, blue stare over the congregation and Kitty felt as if he were staring directly at her. She cringed inwardly. Wasn't that exactly what she was doing? She was lying to the Watsons and all the others here about Faith being her sister, acting like that was the truth. What would happen if the lie ever came out? Kitty's throat tightened as they stood to sing another song. She couldn't help it. After she and Henry were married, she could tell him. It was the best she could do. Sunday dinner was a merry affair. Olivia had promised they would decorate the Christmas tree that afternoon, and Faith was impatient to get started. She rushed to set the table as soon as they arrived home from church. Kitty had left a ham and sweet potatoes baking and quickly opened up a jar of green beans and heated them up while Faith talked continuously. Kitty had to smile. Was this the same little girl who barely spoke during those dark months after her father had died? "Now we can decorate the tree," Faith announced as she licked the last of the tapioca off her spoon. "We've already got out boxes and boxes of decorations. And we can hang the ones I made with Olivia." "That will be fine, Faith, but first I have an announcement to make." Henry stood up at the table and cleared his throat. "Kitty and I have decided we will be married on New Year's Day." Excitement bubbled around the room as everyone spoke their congratulations at once. "Oh, son, I am so happy for you both." Olivia wiped tears from her cheeks with her napkin and reached out to hug her son. "And Kitty, I am proud to have such a good, kind woman as my daughter." "Here, here," Charles cheered and tipped his water glass in her direction. "To a new marriage at the new year." Kitty blushed as she too was hugged by Olivia. She smiled and hugged the older woman back, but on the inside she felt raw. She hated going into this marriage with a lie hanging over her head. "I'm happy to become part of the Watson family. Thank you for being so kind to me and Faith." Kitty spoke as warmly as she could, considering there was a hunk of ice forming around her heart. "Now we can decorate the tree," Henry said as he winked at Faith. Kitty stood back and watched Faith carefully consider where to run the next string of popcorn on the tree. Her breath caught as she watched her beautiful daughter. It was so good to see her happy again, enjoying Christmas. Kitty knew she had been blessed with a remarkable daughter. Faith had never complained when they barely had enough to eat back in Boston. She had fit into this new environment without a whimper, always acting the part of Kitty's sister, not making the demands a child normally makes of her mother. She used her bright, inquisitive mind to its fullest, making headway through the collection of books lining the walls. Kitty wished she felt half as happy as Faith looked. She didn't know if she would ever learn to love Christmas again. She brushed a hand over her eyes, feeling the beginning of a headache starting. Maybe some fresh air would help. She'd taken short walks around the acreage before and found she liked being out in nature. She'd even spent some time down by the horses as they grazed nearby in the pasture. "I'm going to get some air, folks," she told Faith and Olivia. "Maybe that will wash away this headache." "Feel better, dear," Olivia called as Kitty wrapped a warm shawl around her shoulders. Kitty wiggled her fingers at her and stepped outside. The air was crispy. Kitty felt better as soon as she sensed the gentle breeze caress her cheeks. She breathed deeply, loving the bright smells of December. She headed across the lawn, deciding to take the well-worn path through the patches of snow she'd noticed the other day when she was hanging laundry. The trail led down toward the pond and wound its way upward past it, giant trees lining the path. She hadn't explored this part of the ranch yet and walked eagerly along the trail, curiosity pushing her on. Before she knew it, she was farther away from the house than she had ever been. She stopped quickly as she took in the sight before her. It was Henry, kneeling at a cemetery plot, his hat in his hands. He knelt there silently, the breeze ruffling his brown hair, his shoulders slumped. He looked so alone. She shouldn't be there, shouldn't intrude on his private moment. She turned to go, but her foot crunched a pile of leaves and Henry jerked around. "Don't go, Kitty," he called. "Come here. Please." Kitty slowly walked toward him, unsure what he wanted. She looked down at the headstone, and she read it. "Sophie Watson, beloved wife. Rest in peace. Sophie was my first wife. I married her 10 years ago. She was killed in a terrible accident a month later." Kitty was stunned. She had no idea Henry had been married before. "I'm so sorry, Henry." He nodded and cleared his throat. "You have no idea how much it hurts to lose someone you love so much, someone you feel like you can't breathe without." Kitty reached out and took his hands. Now was the time to tell him. To wipe the slate clean. "I understand, Henry. You see, I've suffered and lost loved ones, too." She paused for a moment and looked into his eyes, preparing to tell him about Tim, about Faith, when a clanging sound broke through the silent air. Henry's head jerked up. "That's Ma. When she rings that bell, it means to come running. Let's go." He clutched her hand, and they sprinted toward the house. Chapter 10. "I'm here, Ma." "What's wrong?" Henry shouted as they burst in the front door. "It's your father. He's fallen off the ladder." Olivia hurried back to the living room and over to Charles's side. "He's hurt his ankle. I think we could have managed to get him up, but Faith had already rung the bell. I told her to do so if there was ever an emergency." Kitty saw Charles sprawled on the floor, his hand rubbing his head. "Gave myself a good bump on the noggin, too." Together, they all helped the old man to get up and Henry swept him up in his arms. "Come on, now, I can make it. Put me down, son. I'll put you down when we get to your bed and not before. Just relax and enjoy the ride." Charles sputtered but eventually fell silent as Henry carried him to the bedroom. When Henry placed him on the mattress, he grinned. "Just think, I used to carry you like that. Now, maybe before too long, you'll be carting your own little one around." Henry's eyes flew to meet Kitty's, and her heart stopped. Of course, Charles wanted grandchildren. She was sure Olivia did, too. "Let's not put the cart before the horse, Pa," Henry quickly said. "We're not even married yet. Now, should I ride for the doctor?" "Nah, this old ankle will be back to rights in a few days. It's not broke. See?" He gingerly twisted his swollen ankle. "Okay. I guess you've had enough broken bones to tell when you've got another one. You got that right, Henry. Now you all go on out there and finish decorating that tree. It's almost done." Henry snapped the reins over the horses and turned the wagon toward town. Ma needed some more flour, sugar, and other supplies for all the Christmas baking she was doing, and he needed to pick up some gifts. He had already purchased a new pipe for his father, and he'd made a new plant stand from a beautiful hunk of walnut for his ma. But now, he needed gifts for Kitty and Faith. He'd been thinking a lot about Kitty lately, it seemed, ever since their encounter at Sophie's grave. He'd seen the pain in her eyes, the hurt that lined her face, when she told him that she'd suffered loss, too. And from the look on her face, he knew she was telling the truth. Who was it, he wondered, that could bring such a look of sadness to her pretty face? Yes, he knew her parents were gone, but he sensed there was something more. Something she wasn't telling him. Well, he guessed she had a right to her secrets. As long as they didn't affect their future together, he didn't have to know everything about her past. He stopped at the general store to get the things his mother needed and selected a book called Little Women for Faith. Kitty was a little harder to choose a gift for. He decided he'd stroll down the street and window shop for a bit. When he got to the dressmaker's, he stopped. The peach-colored dress in the window would look beautiful on Kitty. The material was almost the same color as her complexion. Little roses held up the bottom ruffle of the skirt, delicate lace peeking below. A bell jingled as he entered the store, and Becky Swanson looked up from pinning the hem of a dress Mrs. Stimplemere preened in. "Be right with you, Henry." "No rush," he said. A few minutes later, he finished the transaction and tucked the package carefully into the wagon. He couldn't help humming a happy little Christmas tune as he turned the horses toward home. "There, that's the last batch of cookies in the oven," Olivia declared, slapping her palms together. "The children at the orphanage will eat well this Christmas. I bet they'll especially love your chocolate chip cookies. They're always my favorites. Well, I like the ones with the gumdrops cut up in them, too. I'm glad we're not giving them all away and saving some to eat ourselves. Say, Kitty, would you help me for a minute?" Olivia added, then moved into the dining room, and Kitty followed. "I want to move this plant here to the other window," she said, pointing toward the large philodendron in the corner. "Okay. You've been awfully quiet the last couple days. Is there anything bothering you?" "Oh, I'm okay. You know, if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm a pretty good listener." The soft tone of Olivia's voice touched Kitty and she hesitated, then told Olivia about finding Henry at Sophie's grave. "I didn't know he'd been married before," she confessed. "And she died shortly after their wedding. That is so sad." Olivia looked at Kitty with sorrowful eyes. "Sophie was a wonderful girl. Henry met her when she was just 16 years old when she came to town with her Uncle Jed. When Jed died a couple of years later, she was alone but Henry had fallen head over heels for her. They were married on the first day of December. She was gone less than a month later. That was 10 years ago. Did he love her very much?" "With his whole heart. I was thinking he'd never get over his grief." Olivia sniffed, blinking back tears. "He never did want to talk about it much, just held it inside. I was afraid he'd given up on life." The woman reached over and laid her hand on Kitty's arm and gave her a heartfelt smile. "But now you're here. He's starting a new life." Kitty felt a lump rise in her throat. Before she could say anything, they heard an anxious cry from the kitchen. "The cookies. I think they're burning." Faith's frantic voice called. Kitty gave Olivia a quick hug instead of saying anything, and they both took off toward the kitchen. Chapter 11. Henry rode across the hills, his eyes alert. He'd seen signs of wild horses near here the other day and was on the lookout for a small herd of mustangs. He'd stopped working with the horses for a long time after Sophie's death. Before she died, he had loved breaking wild horses, had enjoyed a special rapport with them. Sophie used to say he was part horse, he recalled with a smile. Then, after Sophie was killed by that wild horse, he could barely look at them. He'd wanted to shoot the horse that had thrown Sophie. He turned his back on the animals. At last, though, he found himself drawn back to taming and selling horses. Their ranch was known for the quality horseflesh they offered, and his family depended on the money the horses raised. And it wasn't only being responsible with finances, he had to admit, he liked working with the horses. He realized it was kind of foolish to be mad at all the horses because one of them had caused the death of his love. Sort of like hating all the flowers because one died when it was picked. He still felt a connection to the animals. A thrill ran through him when one of the big beasts began to work with him instead of against him. But he did need to warn Kitty and Olivia to stay away from the horses. He would teach them both to ride in the spring if they wanted. He pulled up and studied the signs of horses on the move. He didn't think they were too much farther ahead of him. He checked his rope and pulled down his hat. He was after the stallion. Get him going toward the ranch and the rest of the herd would follow. He kicked Arrow forward and felt the thrill of adrenaline run through him. He had to admit it. He did love the chase. Kitty didn't know what to do about Christmas presents for everyone. She fretted about it as she made breakfast for the family. She poured oatmeal into the pan of boiling water and stirred the contents. Scrambled eggs and canned peaches were on the menu as well, and she, Faith, and Olivia worked compatibly together as they prepared the meal. She was still pondering the question of what to do about Christmas gifts when she pulled the muffins from the oven and declared breakfast was ready to be served as soon as Charles and Henry came in from the barn. Charles hobbled to the table, leaning heavily on the walking stick Henry had fashioned for him, and sat down, scratching his head. "I don't know, Henry. We're going to need more lumber than I thought to finish that new chicken coop." "It's okay, Pa. I can run into town and pick it up and be back in a few hours," Henry said as he pulled out his chair and sat down. "May I go with you?" Kitty rushed to ask. She could find what she needed in town. She still had a few dollars squirreled away and wanted to spend it on Christmas gifts for Faith and Henry. She'd already made a dress for Faith and knitted gloves for both Charles and Olivia, but she wanted to get something else for Faith, though, and she did need something for Henry. His would be the hardest to pick out. "Sure. Can you be ready in about 30 minutes? Kitty nodded. When breakfast was finished, she hurried to get the dishes done, but Olivia hustled her off. "Go on, now, you've done enough. Go and have a good time." Kitty took off her apron and ran upstairs to check her hair and grab her wrap. She was back down minutes later, and she and Henry went out the door and got in the sleigh. It had snowed the night before, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of white. The sun was shining now, and the frozen crystal sparkled like a blanket of diamonds covering the earth. The air was brisk but not too chilly, and Kitty sat back and enjoyed the ride. The small town was bustling just 2 days before Christmas, and people shouted cheery greetings as they passed. Henry pulled the horses up in front of the general store and helped her down. "I'm going to the lumberyard, and then I'll be right back. See you in a few minutes." Kitty waved goodbye at him and headed into the store filled with bright, fragrant merchandise of all kinds. She wandered through the crowded aisles, touching a bolt of soft fabric or sniffing a bar of soap. She finally decided on a lovely brush and hand mirror in white, decorated with pink rosebuds for Faith, but she still needed to get something for Henry. But what, she wondered as she looked over razors, belts, and other various sundries. Nothing seemed quite right for the quiet rancher. Then her gaze hit on a soft plaid woolen muffler knit with threads of burnt umber, gold, sage green, and chocolate. The colors reminded her of the shade sparkling in Henry's eyes, and she picked up the scarf to add to her purchases. "Doing some Christmas shopping?" a feminine voice inquired over her shoulder. "Lucinda." "Hello. It's so good to see you." Kitty gave the woman a warm one-armed hug as she jostled her purchases in the other arm. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you, too. Is that muffler for Henry?" Kitty smiled and nodded. "Do you think he'll like it?" Lucinda nodded emphatically. "Of course. It's lovely. I think Ben will like the gift I have for him, too. It's on order, though, and won't be here for about 7 months or so." She laid her hand gently on her abdomen and a secretive grin slid across her face. "Really, Lucinda? You're going to have a baby? That's wonderful." "I think so, too. Kitty, if you ask me again today if I think becoming a mail-order bride was the right decision, I'd tell you it's the best decision I ever made." Her face lit up and she seemed to be glowing. "I am truly happy. And I hear the date has been set for your wedding now." "Yes. New Year's Day. Congratulations, best wishes, all those things. I just hope you will be as happy as I am." "Thanks, Lucinda." Kitty hugged her again. "Now I better get this paid for and in a bag before Henry gets back and sees it." She managed to tuck the muffler away in her reticule just as Henry walked in the door. Kitty was startled to see the angry look on his face, the way his eyebrows knitted together and how his mouth turned down in a scowl. "Henry, what's wrong? You look so angry." Kitty laid a hand on his arm, fear shooting through her. Henry looked confused then forced a wry grin. "Nothing's wrong, Kitty. I just hate liars, that's all." Her heart stopped beating for a moment. How had he found out? I ran into Max Holcomb, that's all. He's one of the biggest liars in all of Montana. He shook his head in disgust. There's no excuse for it. Last time I saw him, he promised to keep his boy in school, but I just saw the child helping Max load up a wagon full of lumber. Kid's only 9 years old, and he's got a bright mind. He needs to be in school. Instead, his dad keeps him home most of the time and works him like a slave. Oh, I'm sorry for the little boy. He deserves an education. She didn't want to talk about liars with Henry. No way. So, are you ready to go home? I'm ready if you are. Your sleigh awaits, ma'am. Henry swept off his cowboy hat and bowed before leading her out the door and helping her up to the seat. Chapter 12. Kitty sat on the edge of her bed, her hands twisting in her lap. He hated liars, and that was exactly what she was. He would never forgive her for lying to him about Faith and Tim. Henry was a good man. He deserved someone better than her. He deserved an honest woman. She had agreed to this marriage of convenience, but she hadn't been honest about herself. He wasn't getting someone who hadn't given her heart to a man before. He wasn't even getting someone who didn't lie about being a mother. Their marriage would be based on deceit. She needed to take Faith and return to Boston. Her mind told her that was the right decision, but her heart continued to argue. Faith would be heartbroken to leave Charles and Olivia and Brutus, the dog. And, if Kitty were honest with herself, she would be heartbroken to leave Henry. He was a good man. He loved and honored his parents, he was a hard worker, and he was kind to her and Faith. She had felt drawn to him lately. Goodness, she might even be falling for the man. That thought scared her so much she decided to go for a walk and clear her head. Outside, she strolled toward the barn. She couldn't actually be having feelings for Henry, could she? She'd only known him a few weeks. Yes, he was handsome, yes he was desirable, but he'd made it clear he didn't want her in that way. Yet she couldn't deny the genuine sadness that filled her at the thought of leaving and never seeing him again. Staying and living a lie would be even more painful, though. She wandered across the snow-covered yard toward the horses. She'd stuck a couple of carrots in her pocket and strolled over to the fence and called a big, black horse toward her. He was a beauty she hadn't seen before, and he approached her slowly to investigate the carrot she held out. "Do you like that, boy? Is it good?" She ran a hand down his sleek neck, and he tossed his head up and down with a snort. "I used to ride horses when I was a little girl no older than Faith. Did you know that?" She let her mind drift back more than 20 years and smiled at the memory of being on the back of old Nell, the mare her father had owned for a while. That had been fun. She loved the feeling of freedom she felt when she rode that horse. She wondered. I bet I could still ride. It couldn't be too hard for a grown woman if a child could do it, right? Kitty was going to do it. She would just climb on the horse's back and sit there. They didn't have to really go anywhere. She just wanted to feel what it would be like to be back on a horse. Would she still feel that wonderful sense of freedom, like she could go anywhere she wanted? It was a whimsical thought, but since she might be leaving soon and never have another chance to do it again, why not? It wouldn't hurt anything. "There you go, boy. That's a good boy." She crooned to he horse, and he came closer to the fence as she climbed up another rung. "Good boy. Hold still." She carefully maneuvered to the top rung and balanced there, swinging her legs to the other side. There. Now if she could just get on top of him she'd have it made. She stretched her leg across his back and sat down, her hands clenching the thick black mane. "Wait, Kitty. Don't." The cry came from Olivia on the back porch just as the horse's head reared back and an indignant neigh split the air. Kitty felt his muscles bunch beneath her and tightened her knees to get a better grip, but it wasn't enough. The horse bucked and reared and Kitty fought to hang on, digging her hands into his mane. His hooves hit the ground with bone-jarring thuds, Kitty's teeth crashing together from the force. Then he reared again, this time even higher, and Kitty knew she was going to fall. A scream burst from her throat as she felt herself slipping downward. "Mama!" Faith's scream rang through the air. "Mama!" Henry pushed the barn doors open and froze. His horrified gaze took in Kitty on the back of the stallion he'd brought in yesterday, and for a second, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Dear God, if anything happened to her. Henry took off running toward the corral and leaped over the fence, but he wasn't fast enough. Kitty lay unmoving on the ground, her eyelids shuttered, by the time he reached her. He knelt next to her and didn't breathe until she opened her eyes and looked at him in confusion. "Kitty," he whispered. "Kitty, are you all right?" His hands ran down her arms and legs as he frantically searched for injuries. "What were you doing on that horse?" Kitty shook her head and tears filled her eyes as she looked at his worried face. "I'm okay," she said and attempted to sit up. He slipped an arm under her shoulders and raised her head. Faith and Olivia ran up to the fence, and Henry called out reassurances to them. Then it hit him. He knew he had heard Faith scream out, "Mama." Was Faith really Kitty's daughter? He pulled her up to her feet and stared at her. "Why, you lied to me," he stammered. "You lied to me about Faith." Kitty couldn't speak. She was still shaking from the fall, and now Henry was staring at her like she was some kind of monster. Tears filled her eyes and she swayed, dizziness washing over her. She was going to faint. Her knees buckled under her, and she started to fall. "Darn it," Henry growled as he caught her in his arms and headed for the house. He walked straight to the sofa and lay Kitty down. Her eyes fluttered open, she tried to speak, but he didn't want to talk to her right now. He had to think. He asked again, "Are you okay?" She nodded, biting her lip. He whirled and walked out of the room. Chapter 13. Kitty heard a knock at her door just before Olivia walked into the room. She sat up on the bed, trying to hide her face so Olivia couldn't tell she'd been crying. Olivia walked to the side of the bed and sat down. "Faith told me the truth, Kitty. I know she's your daughter." The tears started flowing again as Kitty looked at the woman who had been so kind and welcoming to her. She'd lied to her. 4 weeks. "I'm so sorry I lied, Olivia." Olivia reached over and covered one of Kitty's hands with her own. "I know you must have had a good reason for it. I do wish you'd have trusted me enough to tell me the truth, though. I wish you'd been honest with me." "I know, Olivia. I wish I'd told the truth and taken my chances. The people at the mail-order bride agency said that the men out here didn't want women with encumbrances. Not widows or mothers with children. I was desperate. That's why I decided to tell you that Faith was my sister." "Oh, you poor thing," Olivia said softly. "That's just not true. Men here are so hungry for female companionship, they'd deal with most anything. There's nothing wrong with being a widow or a mother. Many of the men would welcome you no matter what. But now Henry's mad at me because I lied to him. He hates me. I could tell by the way he looked at me." "Of course, he doesn't hate you, child. I know my boy. He doesn't hate you. I think he does. I think the best thing for me and Faith to do now would be to go back to Boston. It's not fair to expect Henry to marry a liar." "No, Kitty, please don't go. Charles and I have grown to love you and Faith. We want you to stay." Kitty remembered the look of hurt and bewilderment in Henry's eyes and knew she couldn't stand having him look at her like that. No, she needed to leave. Sadly, she shook her head. "No, Olivia, it wouldn't be right. Don't make any hasty decisions tonight, Kitty. Wait and talk to Henry first. Besides, it's the day before Christmas Eve. The trains aren't running tomorrow or the next day." "You're right. We won't be able to leave until day after tomorrow, but then we'll go." Olivia stood and shook her head. "We'll see, Kitty. We'll see. In the meantime, though, let's try to have a Merry Christmas." She bent over and dropped a kiss on Kitty's head, then turned and left the room. Kitty stayed hidden in her room a while longer, but knew she needed to go downstairs and help with dinner. She needed to talk to Faith, too, and apologized to Charles. Once again, Christmas had turned into a disaster. She caught up with Faith in the kitchen and pulled her daughter close. Faith hugged her tightly and began to cry. "I'm sorry, Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to give away the secret." She buried her head against Kitty's shoulder and shuddered as sobs shook through her. "I couldn't help it, when I saw you getting thrown by that horse. I was so scared." "I know, baby, I know. I'm sorry I ever asked you to lie about being my daughter in the first place. It wasn't fair to you, or to Henry, or to anyone. And no one could be prouder to be your mother than I am." She put her hands on Faith's cheeks and looked her in the eye. "Don't ever forget that." She knew she should tell Faith that she'd decided not to marry Henry and that they were going back to Boston as soon as she could make the arrangements, but she just couldn't. Not yet. Let her have this one Christmas where she was happy and carefree. Reality would bite back soon enough. She hugged her daughter again, then she smiled. "Say, don't you think we better get supper going? Tomorrow is a big day. It's Christmas Eve, you know." Faith laughed and slid her arm around her mother's waist. "Let's not forget to set out the milk and cookies tomorrow night." Kitty sat curled in the corner of the davenport and watched the embers glowing in the fireplace. It was late and the house was silent. Faith had been in bed for quite a while and Charles and Olivia had turned in an hour ago. She sighed and fingered the soft afghan she'd tossed over her knees. Henry hadn't come home last night or today. He must be absolutely furious. Charles had told her not to worry about it. Henry spent the night out on the mountain quite often, he'd assured her, even in the cold. He was a big boy and would be back when he was ready. "In time for that wonderful dinner you ladies have been working on all week," he'd said and chuckled. Never knew that boy to miss a Christmas dinner. Now Kitty looked over to where the tree stood in all its glory, a golden light cast over it from the fire. She smiled as she noted the gingerbread ornaments that Faith had made, a pang twisting her heart as she thought about telling her daughter about leaving. It would be much harder than coming had been. Faith was happy here with Charles and Olivia. Even she and Henry had spent time together playing checkers and fondling old Brutus. Once again, Kitty was going to uproot her daughter and drag her across the country back to Boston. Back to what? She didn't know. She'd have to find someplace for them to stay. She'd probably only be able to afford a rooming house for now, and she'd have to find a job right away. She dreaded the thought of the long, hard hours spent laboring in a factory, but they had to have an income, and she wasn't trained to do anything else. Restlessly, she stood and walked over to the Christmas tree, drawing deeply of the rich, pine fragrance that filled the air. She wouldn't get to enjoy the smells of nature once they returned to the city. Not unless one counted the smell of piles of trash and horse manure in the streets, she thought ruefully. She let her shoulders slump and heaved a sigh. "Merry Christmas to me," she muttered, and then began to cry. Chapter 14. Christmas morning dawned on a bright and sunny world covered in a blanket of snow. Kitty eyed the scene out her bedroom window, determined to paint a mental picture of the splendor. She wanted to store it in her mind forever. "Morning, Mama," Faith called out as she came rushing in the room. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, baby," Kitty said as she squeezed her daughter's shoulders. "Are you ready for breakfast?" "Yes, I'm starving. I heard Olivia say she always makes cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. I can't wait to eat one." "Well, then, we better get downstairs. We wouldn't want to miss out on fresh cinnamon rolls, would we?" "No, ma'am." Faith giggled. "And a nice, cold glass of milk." They hurried down the stairs and greeted the senior Watsons. Kitty couldn't help but notice Henry still hadn't made an appearance, and she felt her spirits droop even lower. She pushed her gloomy thoughts aside and hurried to help Olivia get breakfast ready. There were, indeed, fresh cinnamon rolls that looked and smelled heavenly, along with bacon and eggs, fried potatoes, and a big, round orange sitting next to each plate. When they'd eaten until they were stuffed, Charles leaned back in his chair and rubbed his belly. "I'd say it's about time to open up those presents that are tucked beneath the tree, wouldn't you, ladies?" Now, just give me a minute to clear the table and check on the turkey, Olivia objected. I'll be along in a couple of minutes. But Henry's not here, Kitty said with a gasp. He wouldn't want to miss opening the presents, would he? He'll turn up in a bit, I'm sure, Charles answered. We want to get it done before Reverend Mason and his brood get here, though. They'll probably be here in just an hour or two. They come every year. Don't rightly even remember when that tradition got started. He chuckled. Kitty couldn't help but fret. Was Henry so mad at her that he wouldn't even come home for Christmas? And then she remembered. He'd told her he often went to Sophie's grave when he needed to think. Could he be there now? Wait, everyone. There's something I need to do first. She grabbed her shawl off a hook by the back door and ran out into the yard. The world was silent this morning. The only sound was that of her feet crunching over the crispy layer of snow that covered the ground as she made her way toward the gravesite. It sat in a beautiful location, overlooking the pond and guarded by the towering mountain behind it. As she climbed to the hilltop, she watched the smoky little clouds her breath created. She was nervous. If he was there, she'd have to explain to him why she lied, and she didn't know if he even cared what her reasons were. He couldn't stand a liar. He'd said it to her himself. She smelled the smoke from the little campfire he'd built close to the grave before she saw him. He sat on a fallen log next to the fire, a blanket draped over his shoulders. She moved as quietly as she could, but he still heard her coming and turned to face her. She stood before him, clasping her hands together, unable to speak. Merry Christmas, Kitty. Merry Christmas, Henry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I lied to you. He patted the log next to him and she sat down, drawing her shawl tightly around her. Why did you tell me Faith was your sister? I don't understand. He tipped her chin up with his fingers, forcing her to look into his eyes. Do you think I'm such a monster that I wouldn't understand? No, of course not, Henry. I was just scared. She paused, chewing on her lip as she thought about what to say. I was married before. His name was Tim, and he was a wonderful man. He didn't have much, but he worked hard every day, to make ends meet. He loved me and he loved Faith, and he wanted to give us everything. Then he got sick. She swallowed, flashing back to the terrible days when Tim was suffering, coughing and wheezing, struggling to breathe. He died just before Christmas 2 years ago. I didn't know what to do. Faith and I were alone, and we had hardly any money. I got a job at a factory and worked to support us, but it was never enough. Faith was growing so fast, and I felt so afraid. Then I lost my job. Henry watched her as she talked, a frown pulling at the corners of his mouth. I didn't know what to do. I was so afraid, so scared. Then I heard the other women talking about the mail-order bride agency, but when I got there, this woman was telling the others that men out here didn't want a woman who had children or had been married before. I panicked. Oh, Kitty, Henry wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close to his side. That isn't true. I wonder why she was telling everyone that. I'm so sorry. But promise me one thing. Don't ever lie to me again. Not about anything. Don't ever be afraid to tell me anything. He looked at her intently and she was surprised to see the affection in his eyes. She'd feared he'd never forgive her, never understood why she had lied. But now, looking in his eyes, relief soared through her. Does that mean you want me to stay, Henry? Because I've already made up my mind to leave if you want me to go. I did lie to you, and I understand if you can't forgive me. His eyes misted over. No, Kitty. I don't want you, or Faith, to leave Montana. You know, I told you I come here when I need to think, and I've been doing some mighty hard thinking the last day or two. Kitty felt such a rush of joy that he didn't want her to leave that she almost missed what he said next. Sophie was a sweet, wonderful girl. I loved her with all my heart. But when I saw you being thrown from that horse, it was like it was all happening again. Like I was going to lose you the same way I lost Sophie. He paused to collect his thoughts before he continued. I felt so much pain at that idea. I knew then. Well, I knew then that I love you just as much as I did Sophie. Maybe even more. You see, Sophie was a girl and I was a boy. But I love you the way a man loves a woman. You know that marriage of convenience I talked about? Yes, she murmured. I'm ashamed to admit that when you first brought it up, all I felt was relief. I couldn't imagine being intimate with a man I didn't love. I felt the same way. Like it would be a betrayal to Sophie. But when I almost lost you, I realized that I want you in my life. I want much more than a marriage of convenience. I want a real marriage with you. I've been out here talking to Sophie about it all night. I'm sure now that she wouldn't want me to be alone the rest of my life. I think I can let go of her now and know that she'll be happy I got a second chance at love. Oh, Henry, I am so glad. My Tim was a loving, giving man, and I truly think he would want me to be happy, too. Henry's lips sought hers and he kissed her gently, running his hands through her hair. When he broke away, he asked her, Do you think I could make you happy, Kitty? Could you learn to love me? I don't have to learn to love you, Henry. I already do. She rested her head on his shoulder. So we both had wonderful marriages. Why are we so afraid to try again? Life is much too short. We both learned that the hard way. We need to capture all the happiness we can while we're still living. I love you, Kitty. Will you marry me? Not a fake marriage. A real marriage that includes love and kisses and children, starting with Faith and maybe some others later down the road. She was so overcome with happiness that she couldn't speak. She threw her arms around him and hugged him close. Chapter 15. The next few minutes were spent in wonder. Kissing, hugging, running fingers across lips, eyelids, and noses. It was all brand new and magical again. I could do this all day. But don't you think we should get back before the others start to worry? Kitty finally asked. I guess that would be the responsible thing to do. He sighed. Taking both her hands, he pulled her up off the log and held her hand. Besides, I've got something I want to give you. Really? A present? What is it? She looked up into his eyes. You'll just have to wait and see, my dear. The faster we get back, the sooner you'll find out. Besides, it's starting to snow again. Let's go. They held hands all the way back to the house. Kitty felt a joy and peace filling her. She wasn't alone anymore. If the Lord gave her only a week with this man, she was determined to make it the happiest week of his life. If he blessed her with 50 years, it wouldn't be long enough. Whatever time they had together would be better than a lifetime alone. Mama's back, Faith hollered as they came through the door, and she's brought Henry home. How about making that Papa Henry, Faith? I'm going to marry your mother, you know. I hope that means you'll be the daughter of my heart. Faith charged at them, throwing her arms around them both. Oh, Papa. Kitty's eyes filled with tears as she watched the man she loved hugging her daughter. Faith was going to have another father, one who would love and care for her just as Tim had. Let's open the presents now, okay? Faith pleaded. It seems like we've been waiting forever. You think so? Henry asked with a chuckle. Charles and Olivia were already seated in front of the Christmas tree when they joined them. Faith bounced in her chair as she opened her first gift, a beautiful wooden box that played Greensleeves when she opened it. Oh, it's so pretty, she breathed delightedly. I love it. Thank you so much. You're so very welcome, Olivia said as Charles beamed with pleasure. The senior Watsons both loved their presents, and Henry modeled his new muffler for them all. Then he pulled a package from under the tree and handed it to Kitty. For you, he said softly. Thank you, Henry, she clutched it to her, her eyes wide with anticipation. Well, I guess we'll never know what it is. She's just going to hold the package, Charles said in a teasing voice. Open it, Mama, Faith urged. Kitty tugged at the bow and untied it, then folded back the paper. Her mouth fell open in wonder when it revealed the prettiest dress she'd ever seen. "Oh, it's so beautiful," she gasped. "Henry, thank you. Can I try it on?" "Of course, you can. It's yours." She dashed for the stairs. She heard the bells on the Masons' sleigh as they pulled into the driveway, but she couldn't wait for them to come in. Up in her room, she ran her hands over the fabric of her new dress. It felt so soft, so silky. When she put it on, she couldn't believe how well it fit. She whirled in front of the full-length mirror. Lovely. She felt like a queen when she came down the stairs. As she reached the bottom, Henry came forward and took her hand. "You are so beautiful. The shining star on top of the tree. You know what? I don't want to wait to marry you. The minister is here. Want to have a wedding before dinner?" Everyone in the room burst into applause when they announced that they couldn't wait another week for their marriage. They wanted to be married now if Reverend Mason would perform the ceremony. "I would be honored," he said when they asked him. "I can't think of anything that would make this a more perfect day." Henry and Kitty moved to stand in front of the fireplace, the Christmas tree adding to the happy scene as they were surrounded by their friends and family. Mrs. Mason sang for them, Olivia sniffled through the service, and Faith stood with her hands clasped together as the vows were exchanged. When Henry lowered his head and kissed her lips, tears filled Kitty's eyes. She didn't hate Christmas anymore. In fact, she could honestly say Christmas was the most wonderful time of the year. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.